Excuse me, everyone. We're about to get started. So first of all, I want to start off by, welcoming faculty, staff, and students to our event. This is an event, sponsored by Unidos and a few other organizations on campus. On behalf of all of us, we welcome you to our Women of Color in Leadership panel discussion. At this time, I'm going to invite, Dr. Pedro Santana, Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs. He is also the President for Unidos, up to the podium so he can, begin our introductions.
Thank you, Rosa, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidos. As was stated, my name is Dr. Pedro Santana, and one of my roles here at the university is serving as the president of Unidos. So, before we begin with our program, I want to familiarize you a little bit about Unidos. Unidos was established on May 5th, 2018, in order to help bring together la comunidad here at Stockton University. Unidos will continue to lead efforts to expand cultural and historical awareness of the contributions of Latinos and the Hispanic community has provided to humanity. In addition to the goals and aims of education, Unidos seeks to address the challenges within Stockton University, the state of New Jersey, and the United States by advocating for the rights of Latinos and recent immigrants to this country so that they can benefit fully from the American dream. We employ the term la comunidad to describe a diverse people with origins from countries in the Americas, the Caribbean, Africa, and other traditionally Hispanic or Spanish-speaking countries, while also recognizing that other labels may apply. We always welcome any allies and any others and appreciate the support of those individuals. Unidos strives to unite the community here at Stockton University, support each other academically, professionally, and personally, serve as the representative voice for those that appreciate the Latino culture, history, and traditions, advocate for our students and work tirelessly to create pathways for their success, enrollment, retention, and graduation from the university. Provide leadership at the university by advocating for structures and policies and procedures that further diversify inclusion efforts at the university. And we unite as an organization with organizations within La Comunidad to ensure that these aforementioned goals are accomplished. Now that I've familiarized you a little bit about our organization and some of our goals, I would like to, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the tireless work of Rosa Maldonado, Heather Perez, Juby Peña, Jessica Grullon, and a bunch of others that worked to make this event possible, but also thank our panel today for taking time out of their schedules to impart some knowledge, wisdom, and, on all of us. Today, we are here to take time and shine light on women of color as part of Women's History Month, but more specifically, women of color in leadership. You see, it was only 100 years ago that women in this country, by way of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, gained the right to vote. It passed by Congress June 4th, 1919, and was ratified on August 18th, 1920. But that's not where it ends. And most recently, 54 years ago, the rest of women and others were able to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, aimed to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from exercising their rights to vote, guaranteed under the 15th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Women have always and will always continue to change and impact the landscape of our communities scattered across the world. Academia as a whole has shifted from its earliest onset when Harvard University was established in 1636 to train white men for the clergy, to the founding of Oberlin College, the first college erected for women within the United States, to the present day where the growth of women in the academy continues to mold and shape our institutions and its responsiveness to our communities. With enrollment numbers across the Mid-Atlantic region that constitute about 60% representation at the undergraduate ranks and 70% plus representation in the graduate ranks, in the graduate schools. Women, but more specifically women in leadership, will continue to transform, innovate, and change the world for decades to come. The growth of women of color within leadership is synonymous with the growth of women in leadership. And today we are here delighted to have the dynamic representation of women leaders to share their unique stories, trials, tribulations, unwavering determination, and stick-to-itiveness that have propelled them forward as trailblazers and leaders within our New Jersey community and into greater positions of responsibility. Now I would like to call to the stage Ms. Jessica Grullon to introduce the distinguished panel that you have here today.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Santana, and thank you everyone again for making it out today for this wonderful event. Look at this fabulous group of women. Oh, I get so emotional every time I see beautiful women of color, our brown skin, different hair colors, lipsticks, and shades. Woo! Don't get me started on this microphone. Okay, so I have the distinct honor to introduce our panelists, but because each of you have a detailed bio of each of them, I'm just going to highlight a few of their feats. So first, I would like to introduce our very own Board of Trustee from Stockton University, Ms. Nelida Valentin, Vice President of Grants and Programs for the Princeton Area Community Foundation. Now, Ms. Valentin, she received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Business Studies from Stockton State at that time, and a Master of Arts degree in Political Science, Public Policy from Rutgers University. She is a graduate of Leadership New Jersey, class of '04, studied at the John F. Kennedy School of Government and Politics at Harvard University, and she serves on the advisory committee to the Superintendent of Trenton Public Schools and the National Resource Network Trenton Advisory Group. She has a unique perspective and experience in leadership development, philanthropy, community engagement, Hispanic affairs, and workforce development. Next, we have our beautiful Miss Billy Bailey, I love that name, Program Manager, Coordinator of the Passport Program, Academic Advisor, Counselor, and Exceptional Educational Opportunities Program at Kean University. Ms. Bailey earned her Master of Arts in Counselor Education from Kean with certification in Substance Abuse Counseling. She also earned a Master of Arts in Public Administration from Kean, and presently is pursuing her doctorate degree, so she's a candidate at Montclair State University in the Counselor Education and Leadership Program. Not only is she a consultant, but she is a school and community relations counselor, author, lecturer, teacher, mediator, and negotiator with students, individuals, and groups. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Michelle Carrera, Chief Executive Officer of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Atlantic City. Now, Doctora Carrera is a native of Puerto Rico. We actually met at one of our meetings of the Hispanic Alliance of Atlantic County, so I look up to her very, very much. She has obtained her doctorate degree in education with a concentration in leadership and management from Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. And Doctora Carrera has also been working in the nonprofit sector for the last 16 years in different leadership roles. And of course, next in my amazing yellow, look at this, Dr. Donnie Allison, President of the Faculty Senate, Professor of Communication Studies and Africana Studies, Coordinator and Chair of the Africana Studies Program at Stockton University, my own friend and my dear mentor. I love her so much. Now, she has been a Communication Studies scholar for more than 2 decades. She has published several articles and dozens of conference presentations on hip-hop culture, on media portrayals of African Americans, on search advocacy. There's many things that you didn't include in this bio. However, Dr. Allison's article on colorism was featured in the Journal of African American Studies special issue on music icon Prince. She continues her scholarship on African American images and arts, entertainment, and media. She said, "You go, girl." All right. Now, I have also the pleasure of introducing Dr. Arlene Gonzalez, Associate Professor of Criminal Justice, Chair of Administration and Finance, Faculty Senate Committee at Stockton University. And I also met Dr. Gonzalez in the Hispanic Alliance of Atlantic County. I think I was 15 or 16 years old. Yeah, no, but I'm not aging you. No, you are amazing. So she's also on the Faculty of Latin American Caribbean Studies, and Dr. Gonzalez earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from Stockton, has a Juris Doctorate degree from Rutgers University School of Law in Camden, and began her career as an educator in 1986, teaching criminal law here at Stockton University. Her recent research interests consist of law, colonialism, and migration, along with 11 U.S. Code Chapter 9 of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Tamara Cunningham is the Assistant Vice President of Global Initiatives and American Director of the Confucius Institute of New Jersey City University. Wow, that was a drive, huh? Coming down here today? Ms. Cunningham has been a leader in higher education for over 20 years and has held instrumental roles in both academic affairs and student affairs. Ms. Cunningham serves with a number of professional international organizations and is currently pursuing a doctorate in educational leadership at St. Peter's University. Her dissertation will explore leadership styles of senior international officers in the midst of the Trump administration. She holds a master's degree in communications and information studies from Rutgers, the State University, and a bachelor's degree in English from NJCU. So please join me and with a round of applause on welcoming our panelists. Now, moderating our panel discussion this evening is Dr. Lisa Honaker, our Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, Professor of Literature. Dr. Honaker joined the Stockton faculty in 1995 as a professor in the literature program. However, we all know her for her funky style, her amazing hair color, and her dance at the galas. Right, Aisha? Right? With Cheryl and Nancy Messina. I remember those days. She stands committed to helping RHU faculty and students implement and promote their work, and is committed as well to promoting the value of the arts and humanities to potential and current Stockton students, alumni, their families, employers, and communities. Dr. Honaker?
Thank you, Jess. Well, as she said, I'm Lisa Honaker. I'm the Dean of RHU, and I'm telling you right now that this will be the most talking that I will be doing today, and it won't be long, because this intro is about preparing us all to listen more effectively to our speakers today. We know that these panelists will be inspiring, but they're dealing with sobering realities in their accounts of their experiences, and we know that when difficult subjects come up or difficult conversations are happening, folks who need to listen and really hear what's being said often get in their own way. For men, for instance, when women talk about gender inequality and sexism, you want to say, well, not all men are like that. I'm not. And when people of color describe their experiences with racism, you might want to say, but not all white people are like that. I'm not. Well, I want to prepare you to listen a little better by giving you a quote from a woman. I looked up her story online. Her name is Sierra White, and she is a Latina, Native, and white person who runs a counseling center at attached to a religious organization in Pennsylvania. And she was speaking to a friend of hers who was LGBTQI and saying that she felt uncomfortable talking when dealing with LGBTQI plus issues because she felt uncomfortable and often didn't know what to say and didn't want to say anything for fear of offense. And her friend told her, and I quote, "Your job isn't to speak right now or formulate a response. Your job is to listen and learn." They need to know, these people here, my community, needs to know that you're listening to them and you're willing to be taught. You don't need to be afraid to ask questions if you're asking out of genuinely wanting to grow. But be prepared to accept a response that will probably make you uncomfortable and possibly even offend or upset you. Then you get to deal with yourself. So that's our mandate today, to listen, learn, and engage. And if what these women say today makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. Discomfort can be the best step towards growth. They may also inspire you, which I'm sure they will do. And with that, I'm done talking, except to provide the questions that our panel will address. So thank you for coming, and the panel will begin. So I'm going to start with one of the panelists will start by answering the question, and then we hope that discussion will be a little more free-flowing. We're going to spend about 10 minutes on each question, and then there'll be a question and answer period for you. Okay, so Donnie, how has your race or ethnicity influenced your career trajectory and leadership skills? And can you share an experience where you encountered racial or gender discrimination in the workplace or at school, and tell us how you maneuvered through that situation?
Okay. It's hard to narrow down to one experience because there have been many. I have been at this for 25 years or so in higher education, and I'm actually going to start with an experience before I talk about the first part of the question asked about my career trajectory. But as I said, there have been many. So starting out in my 20s, teaching, and my first full-time position was in Virginia. And I was often, asked to see my ID. I mean, there were all kinds of things because of the intersectionality with my age, race, gender, all of those things I feel like were at play with the challenges that I often faced in being, honestly, in just being taken seriously. And so 3 weeks into that position, I remember the department secretary saying to me, "I'm so glad you don't have an attitude like I thought you were going to have." So mind you, then I'm in a situation because now I have to decide in like 5 to 10 seconds in my mind, how do you react to something like that? Do you give her what she expected? Because apparently she expected you to be some stereotype of her imagination of what Black women should be like. Mind you, I was the only African American in the department, period, male or female. So whatever her ideas of what a Black woman would be, I can only assume, given that I'm a media scholar, that they had come from media, because knowing where she grew up, they didn't come from real experiences. So my job in my 3 years there became educating her oftentimes, because she would ask me lots of crazy questions. But I always dealt with her in a way that was a teachable moment. Even at the time when I was just, I was like 25 years old, and I still got and understood that my unofficial job has become to educate her about Black women. So just in terms of maneuvering through that situation, that's often what I did. I never, gave her the stereotypical Real Housewife kind of reaction, because I felt, she might have liked that too much. So I generally just would, and sometimes I'd be sarcastic, I have to admit that, but I would generally say, you know, well, it's interesting that you thought that. Where did you get that from? You know, where did you get that idea from? So I would often turn things back on her, and then we would have a conversation. So that's how I often maneuvered through those situations. Even in the classroom, when students would ask ridiculous questions, sometimes I would either use sarcasm or I would just turn the question back around to make them think about where did they even get that perception from. So in terms of how that then has influenced, how race and ethnicity has influenced my career trajectory, as was already mentioned in the bio, I am the Faculty Senate President here at Stockton, and I've been at Stockton for 15 years, and I've held several leadership positions at Stockton. And I don't feel like I was necessarily hindered in gaining each position that I gained, but in fact, oftentimes there was somebody trying to talk me into, oh, you should do this, or you should go for that, or you should be this. But I have found that this long-standing stereotype of Black women being angry or having an attitude, in some ways has served me in these leadership positions, because, you know, sometimes fear is good. So if people, you know, fear you, then maybe they're going to get on top of things and do what you need them to do. And so in some ways, I've actually had to use that stereotype, in all honesty, to my benefit. Now, anyone here who's worked with me these past few years can attest to the fact that I've never gone all Real Housewives on anybody at Stockton. I've never, you know, yelled at or went off. I've never done that. But there are some people, I suppose, who feel like that it's underlying somewhere, so let me be real careful with her. And that's okay. I don't mind that. If you, you know, if you're worried about me, then okay. Then maybe I can get you to do some work. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Don. I think I agree, and I've had similar experiences as Donnie. You know, I in the executive leadership roles that I've had, you know, I was always kind of the token Black woman who they've assigned to committees because, oh, you speak so well, and oh, you're so poised. And I'm like, well, what were you expecting? What difference does it make that I'm a Black woman that speaks so well? And so what I've learned to do, though, is being the token Black woman. And it's funny, I think some people would be rather offended by those things. And I've kind of switched the game a little and said, well, I'm going to just start stacking those tokens, right? And so using those opportunities to be on search committees, to be on various committees for the university, to be able to leverage that for the purposes of my personal and professional growth, and then also to be a real voice in the room for African American and minority and students of color who don't have a voice, right? And so I think that if we use those kinds of stereotypes to our advantage, I think that it could work well for us. I don't know how many people in a room, and I'm probably speaking to the students who are often on Facebook, but it reminds me of the time when I saw a video of a Latino woman coming into her work environment, and she was doing code switching, right? So she was coming in, and every time she saw another Latina in the room, she was like, hey girl, what's up? How you doing? How you doing? And she's in the workplace, and then all of a sudden she sees a white male or a white female, and it's, oh, hey, how are you today? You know, and it's almost like we have to put on this kind of front and not be really who we are. And I feel like there are times when it's necessary to code switch in that way, only because we need and want to feel respected, even in the universities and houses and institutions that we have helped to build. And so it's unfortunate, but this is the platform and this is the environment that we, specifically Donnie and I, as it relates to being African American women, we live in. So I would say to those who are token minorities, token women of color, that I would say that you would just have to stack those tokens and leverage those and look at them more as opportunities than they are deficits.
Oh boy, so much to respond to. Certainly token. But for me, the word that really comes to mind or that came to mind when thinking about these topics was lonely. How lonely it is to be the only one of your kind at an institution. And just by way of background, I started teaching here in 1985 as an adjunct. And I was the only Puerto Rican woman here. I'm still the only Puerto Rican woman on the faculty, 32 years later. And so the impact of that, of course, is the token. You have to represent your people all the time. You're the one. I'm the one today. I'm the token Puerto Rican today on this panel. And I agree. You do have to use your voice. If you're going to be the token, you might as well take advantage of it and use that voice to carry the message that being a token is not fun. It's not cool. And not only that, but when you're the only one, you also miss out on things like mentorship, because there was no one who came before you to show you the ropes, to guide you, to be the example. I was fortunate here that there was a strong group of women of color, African American women, who were very supportive. But there wasn't another Latina. There was not another Latina here to serve as a mentor. And so the repercussions of that, obviously, on your trajectory in your career are serious, because mentorship and guidance is so important. And when you are the token, you don't have that. And so what do I say? What have I done? Well, I speak about it like I'm speaking about it now. And really, you just have to be fearless and understand your role and use that role to hopefully affect some sort of change. And that's it. You can't shy away from that role. If that's your role, that's your role. And use it and embrace it and use it the best you can to maybe bring in a different climate.
Thank you. I think that maybe some of you can ask questions to the panelists who, if you want to know their experience on these issues, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer during Q&A. Okay, Arlene, I'm going to ask you the next question.
okay.
You get to keep talking. What role has gender played in your career advancement? Exploring gender dynamics, how do you navigate the power structures and overcome stereotypes associated with strong female leaders, since you just talked about being fearless?
Oh, you gave me the easy question.
Yes.
In preparation, of course, I was looking at some of the areas where my gender and my ethnicity impacted the trajectory of my career. More specifically, of course, I've already spoken about the idea of being a token, of being the only one of your kind, and how lonely it really is. And I just want to say that Unidos, which is sponsoring this presentation today, was just recently formed. A Latino organization of faculty and staff at an academic institution in the state of New Jersey that has this enormous Hispanic population. We just got that organization. That, to me, is astounding and sad. But when I think about my own career in terms of gender dynamics, some of the things that I looked at and some of the research that I did in preparation was the obligation of childcare. And of course, what the research still shows is that women still carry the burden of childbirth and child rearing, obviously childbirth, but child rearing, and that they are, and I don't want to rattle off statistics here, but 61% of working mothers said that it made it more difficult to advance in their career, as compared to 16% of men. And that was something, I had 2 children, because I started here when I was in my 20s. I had 2 children while on this faculty. And I had to take time, of course, to rear my children. I was a believer in nursing my children, and so that meant that I often had to run home to be able to take care of my children, which meant I couldn't stay for meetings after my classes. I had to arrange my schedule around daycare. And many daycare centers, and the one on this campus, your child has to be potty trained and 2 years old. Not very friendly to women who have child care obligations. And so did it have an impact on my career? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I had to meet these obligations, and I couldn't devote the time to the career that some men, and clearly most men by our numbers, don't have to do. They don't have to make that sacrifice to their career in order to rear the children. A more touchy component, of course, has to do with sexual harassment. And not so much here, but when I practiced as an attorney, that was also an issue. And when we look at sexual harassment data, it often looks at gender and rarely at the intersectionality. And what the data shows is that minority women are more likely to be victims of sexual harassment. And of course, that the impact of that can be as severe as PTSD, but then there are other actual physical health issues having to do with that. Depression, eating disorders, sleep disorders, in addition to, of course, mental health concerns and fear. And so for Latina women specifically, who are often portrayed in the media as these over-sexualized creatures, that is the image that is projected on society. Well, we're just these hot mamas. And that is practically an opening to that kind of behavior. And what is the reporting? The reporting is minimal. Across races, across ethnicities, most women do not report, not even locally, like to their union or to their supervisor, and even fewer file formal actions, legal complaints. And so in this day, we still just live with it. We just deal with it. We keep it quiet. We often don't share it with our partners. We don't even share it with our coworkers. And if you are going through something like that, or have, and you are, as a result of that, suffering from mental health issues and physical issues, then how productive can you be? So, okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think from a gender perspective, when we talk about the stereotype of a female executive, whether minority, I think the minority factor influenced a lot. I think as a female leader, when you're in executive positions or leadership position, you need to be ready to embrace the stereotype. I think when a female is a strong leader, usually the stereotype is that is aggressive or too emotional. And if a male exhibits that same type of leadership, is recognized as a great leader or an effective leader or a leader that gets things done. So I think that as a female, you need to be okay with that and embrace that stereotype and frankly have thick skin if you want to be an executive, because the road is harder for us. Whoops. Can you hear me?
Is your light on?
Nope. So the road will be harder. You will be questioned more than a male counterpart. When you bring an idea, you will have to prove it. You will have to make sure that you keep your emotions in check, because God forbid that a woman lose their temper, because automatically that stereotype will haunt you as a person who is emotional or not effective. So I do think that we're still in a very male-dominated culture in different arenas, especially in the corporate world. So as females, it's important that we capitalize in our strength to be able to get our point across, that we don't shy away. Sometimes we are too afraid of speaking up, and we pass opportunities in our careers because we are not as vocal, and we don't want to be judged under that stereotype, because even among females, when another female is strong, it's like, oh, we may not want to work with someone like that, or she's too aggressive, or she doesn't play along, or don't talk about the nails, or like it's too focused on the outcome. So sometimes you really need to embrace and focus on your career, and no matter what the stereotype is, go for it, embrace it, and say, yes, I'm a strong executive, I'm a strong leader, and I'm ready to get things done.
Can I just add to that? I have a motto, and my motto is this: if you're not invited to the table, then you're on the menu. So I believe strongly, to exert your leadership, you want to, even though you're a female, you're a woman, you're a minority, good, glad. Be the one at the table. Be the one, when you are invited to the table, to share your knowledge, your wisdom, your expertise. Don't be afraid to share your expertise. Don't be afraid to be the expert in the room. Oftentimes, you are, and they're not. So you have to embrace that. And as far as the thick skin, I wanted to say, when I first was employed at Kane University, I was not this strong-minded kind of person. I was very timid, I should say. And my first director says to me, Billy, you've got to get some thick skin. Stop taking things so personal. Stop letting them talk to you and treat you any old kind of way. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to say. She's like, you've got to get some thick skin. I didn't understand that at that particular moment. But over time, I learned, oh, that's what she means. Oh, I understand that now. Okay, I get it. So my name, Billy Bailey, I love it. I love it. It rolls off the tongue. But sometimes it is a way that people look at me and say, or not, they don't even look at me, don't even know me yet. Is it a male? Is it a guy? And when they make those phone calls to you and you answer and say, yes, this is Billy. Billy? Yes, this is Billy. Click. It happens. But that's okay. When you get those phone calls and they don't mind that Billy's a girl, it's a good thing. And then you go in there and you shine. You do it and you do it well.
I just wanted to add, these are also wonderful points that have been made already, and I agree with so much of what's been said, and I think that one of the challenges around race and gender, particularly when we show up at tables as leaders and women of color, is that there is this inherent bias from others because they don't understand who we are, they don't really know us, and we do often, I think the gender piece plays into our upbringing. I know for me as a Latina woman, one of my biggest fears is being wrong or not having enough information. And I think, one of the things that earlier in my career I was afraid to speak up because I felt I didn't know enough or I didn't have enough and I looked different and I didn't sound like these people that didn't look like me and certainly had different kind of preparation. And so I think one of the challenges and I think one of the opportunities at the same time from a personal level is to be willing to step up to the table with what we bring to the table and appreciate that what we bring is very valuable, just like everybody else around that table.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tamara, Nalita set you up big time there.
Yes, she did.
This next question is about imposter syndrome. Have you dealt with it? And if so, how did you cope with it? And what tips might you suggest for other women?
I've certainly dealt with it. I just want to set this up, and I want to just define what imposter syndrome is so that everyone in the room is aware. It's this notion that you're not as good as you think you are, or the pattern of thinking that your success or your accomplishments, that if someone were to expose you, that it would all be a fraud. And so a lot of times when we are or get to a point in our lives when we feel like we've arrived or we feel like we are successful, but we're in a room of people who are as equally successful or we feel are more intelligent or have more preparation, for example, then we tend to hide ourselves. The thing about women in leadership, and I have to pick on Rosa today because this happened even in the back room, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but what we tend to do when we're complimented or, when someone says, oh, you're doing an amazing job, and this is an amazing presentation, and you're like, well, there's so much more that needs to be done. Oh, I don't know if it was that great. We tend to not take on the compliment. Instead of just saying, oh, thank you very, very much. We worked very hard, or I worked very hard on this. And men do it all the time. It's like, thank you. You compliment them. It's like, thank you. Yeah, I belong here. And I just feel like we need to own belonging here. We also belong here. And so I remember when I was promoted to the AVP position, at New Jersey City University, we have a third floor, right? An executive floor where the president's office is, the provost's office is, and if you've made it to the third floor, you've arrived, okay? So they moved my office to the third floor, and I was like, oh my God, they're gonna uncover me, and they're gonna realize that I don't know what they think I know, and I'm not as good as they think I am, and I'm going to be made out to be this fraud. And so I remember sealing a deal that generated a lot of revenue for the university, and this is a deal that's been going on for years and years and years, even now, that I should feel really good about. When we got that deal, I remember that I asked the president to open up a center for international. It was a Confucius Institute, and that institute was in another building. And so what I did, because I was so uncomfortable and because I was dealing with that imposter syndrome, I moved my office from the third executive floor of Hepburn Hall to that center. And so what looked like a promotion, right? For me, what was supposed to be a promotion what looked like a demotion to others. Well, and then the rumors started, well, why are they moving Tamara from the third floor of Hepburn Hall, right? And what people didn't realize is Tamara moved herself because I felt I didn't belong. And we do that to ourselves as women often. And we have to take ourselves out of that mind frame, and we have to say, yes, we do belong here. That fear is paralyzing. That fear can move you from situations and circumstances that are made to propel you to other places. And so when I finally got it, after I moved my office and all that, and I remember saying, I'm here, I don't mind being here, I'm a servant leader, I love to lead among the people that I work with and those who report to me. But my voice, my expertise, what I bring to the table, the fact that I've been there for 20 years, that's valuable on the third floor in Hepburn. There's no one that looks like me there. There's no one that has my passion, my expertise. No one has that. And my removing myself because of this imposter syndrome was more of a detriment to those I serve, my students, than it was to me. Right? And so we have to remember that we need to be steadfast and immovable in those places, even when we're uncomfortable. even when we're uncomfortable. And so before we turn it over to the other ladies, I want to share this one quote, and it was just so powerful, and I just want to share pieces of it so you can hear it. It's by Marianne Williamson, and it made me think of this when we were in the back room with Rosa, when we were complimenting her. It's like, no, this is a great thing that you're doing. Don't, feel good about that. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? And it's actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. And so if you're big, that's great. Go out there and be big. Establish your place wherever it needs to be.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly because I remember going through this in the classroom in the early days. And for me, it was always a situation, and again, like I said, my first full-time position was in Virginia. It was, I don't know, 15,000, 20,000 students, something like that. And I had a class one semester where 4 or 5, white males in the same frat used to sit in the front row, and they used to just really challenge me. And so I remember talking to one of my mentors from grad school, and she said, how many degrees do they have? And what do you have? You know more than they do, trust me. And so it really, I had to really think about that. Because that was absolutely true. This material that I have to offer them, they didn't know. They're undergraduate students. But I would always second guess myself in those situations and just feel like, oh my God, I gotta, I would be so concerned about the ways that they were going to challenge me. So that was a process. And also, I was the type who, even if I was in a the class was going well and we're having a discussion and most of the students are engaged, if there was one who just had this look on their face and I couldn't get past that. I just used to keep thinking to myself, what the heck? What's wrong with you? What am I saying? What am I not saying? And so those kinds of things, I think really very much fit into this notion of imposter syndrome, where I was always, I'm going to be honest, it's probably the past 10 years that I felt most comfortable, like, yeah, I'm in this room. Yeah, I belong here. But initially, that was very challenging. Even after I got my PhD, I was still kind of like, and again, I remember one of my mentors saying, put your degrees on the syllabus. Like, put what you have, because just to get that out of the way from the very beginning, so that they don't have to sit there wondering, oh, what's she doing here? And there were students students would do that. Like, oh, she must be here because of affirmative action, or why does she, But so those kind of things, it is a process, is what I'm saying. It's a process, but you definitely have to own your worth and understand that, listen, I'm here because I deserve to be here. And that's something that if it means looking in the mirror, you have to do that. And when I even got to the point of consulting, that's another thing where I had to say to myself, okay, when it comes to that question where they say, okay, how much do you charge for a workshop? And I was always like, I don't know how, maybe I shouldn't ask for, And again, mentoring, there's nothing like mentoring. I'm still in contact with my undergrad professors, my grad professors. I always go to them and say, okay, somebody said this, what do you think? And that's helped me through a lot of this in terms of imposter syndrome.
Okay. I'm going to actually have to cut this one off because we're getting behind. Plus, she set me up again. So, Nalita, have you sought out mentors? And what role did they play in your success? What's the best piece of advice that you've received as a woman of color in leadership?
Yes. Juicy questions. I'm going to answer this question about mentors from a personal experience, and I know that my colleagues on this dais will have lots to add in this area, and I've thought about this a lot over my career. I used to think early on that mentors is something that you find and sort of attach to yourself. And I've now concluded over so many years and so many different experiences, having worked in so many different sectors. I mean, I spent 23 years in state government in 4 major departments and several divisions, and dealt with people across the spectrum from commissioners down to the administrative staff. And I've worked and set up nonprofits. I've led a workforce investment board. I have done any number of things, and now I work for a community foundation. And I'm convinced that this idea of mentors is really more of a process. First of all, I used to think that mentors is ascribed. Well, I think mentors in our lives evolve. I have found, and I feel very strongly today, that, some of my mentors are my colleagues. In some cases, I have friends who serve a different role in my life that serve as mentors. I have one friend, Nitsa, who is like my personal friend, and I don't actually see her often, but she is someone that I can call when I have like heart pains, everybody knows, like we all have these heart pains, these things that happen to us that you wouldn't like dare talk to anybody else about or admit to yourself even that you have. And she's my sounding board. She's a person I can tell and call, and I actually speak to her more than I see her for years. And she serves this very special mentorship role for me. I think we're humans, and as humans, and we often forget this when we talk about leadership and organizational development, and I've done my whole track of trying to understand race dynamics and culture dynamics and leadership development across so many different sectors that I'm convinced that, we have lots of resources that we draw on. There's a lot of books that you say, if you that are out there that you buy and you kind of read. If you do this, then you're a leader. If you do this, then you have the right kind of track. But we are human beings, and we are a whole person with multiple dimensions. And so I believe that, this idea of mentorship is really really being fortunate enough to know yourself first, to really appreciate and understand yourself first in your own evolution. And the folks that really come around your life at different levels. I mean, there's workplace mentors, there's professional mentors. If you kind of look at a professional organization, a very particular sector like business where I started, and look at, sort of people that evolve around that, that you feel really comfortable, that evolve in your circle, that you can reach out to ask questions. They become important mentors. And then, of course, at the personal level, people that evolve in your life that are on a personal level, social level. And I think that we develop that, and I think that they evolve over time. In terms of the best advice that I've ever received, and I've gotten lots of it, but the one that struck me as I was thinking about this question is trust yourself and trust your instincts. We evolve in the world with lots of people coming around us telling us what we should be doing. And oftentimes they're well-meaning, and it's very good advice from their perspective. But no one knows you like you know yourself. And so if we spend time really, really, honestly, earnestly trying to work at that basic level of developing our likes, understanding ourselves, understanding yourself in a way that you're really sort of centered around who you are and what resonates for you and where your skill set is and how you evolve in life. I believe that both this idea of mentors comes naturally because it can't be prescribed, but also that you evolve and being patient with yourself. So trusting your instincts and being patient with yourself and trusting yourself, I think, is the best advice that I've ever received.
Can I add to that?
You bet.
Okay, so I totally, 100% agree with what you're saying. You have to have more than one mentor. It depends on what it is that you're striving to achieve. I know I have about 4 or 5 because I don't want to burn 2 or 3 of them out. So I've got one for higher education. I've got one for my counseling profession. and I have one just for professional development, just to see how am I growing? What should I do? Because you don't always have the answer. You don't always have the answer, and it's always best to get someone who's experienced, who's knowledgeable, who knows where those pitfalls are so you can avoid them. That's the best thing. Most mentors are looking to help you. If you have a mentor that's not helping you or guiding you, then find a new one, because that's not the one for you. So I totally agree with what you're saying, 110%. You have to have a mentor, someone who you can look up to, someone you respect, someone you can reach out to at any moment, any time. And I think that's very important. It's very important. And those of you who don't have one, please, we implore you to get one. You need at least 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, and I would add that mentors come and go, just like our
Yes.
lives come and go, like friends come and go in our lives. At different phases, we need different kinds of mentorship, and I think we need to be okay with that and evolve with that as well.
Absolutely.
I'll just add a couple of things. I remember many, many years ago, easily 20 years ago, I received very, very wise advice from 2 wonderful women, Dr. Pat Reed Merritt and Dr. Linda Nelson, and the topic was fear of success. And the conversation was how big of an issue that is for women of color, of people of color generally. That the expectation for us is so low that we are almost afraid to reach for those heights, to really push ourselves, to say, oh, okay, yes, of course I can do that. I have the schooling, I have the training, I have the experience. And so, as I said at the start, when I first started speaking, it was be fearless. Be fearless. And I would add to what, or I would agree with what Nelida said. You need to know yourself and trust your education, trust your experience, and know that you are entitled to that success and that you can work for that success and not be afraid of it, because you have been your entire life surrounded with the stereotypes that say, you don't belong there. This is where you're supposed to be.
Thank you. This one's pretty good too, actually, in terms of setup. Michelle, what is your favorite failure? Fear of success can often, but failure is important for success. So what's your favorite failure and what did you learn from it?
This was a difficult one because I have many. And I think as a leader, you need to have many. I would say my favorite failure was actually the fear of failing, the fear of failure. I think early in my career, I was so afraid of failing and not proving myself as a leader and not doing the right thing that constrain my ability as a leader. You become very transactional when you're only thinking about what I need to do not to fail. And you cannot lead effectively your team when that's the only thing that you're thinking, because the same way that you don't want to fail, then you become this leader that expect no one around you not to fail. So you're expecting perfection, and that's not a reality. And I think as you learn to trust yourself and you lose that fear, you become highly creative. You pursue opportunities that you never thought you were going to pursue. Because once you lose that fear, the sky is the limit. Because automatically you think, what is the worst that it can happen? It's not going to work out, and I will learn something out of that, and that will make me a better leader, that will make me a better professional. So I would say that on the personal level, that was my favorite fear, my favorite failure, and I learned about it early in my career, and I think it's a work in progress. because it's something that it's a taste that you need to get accustomed to. It's not easy to fail and for you to say, okay, I fell at this, I'm happy with it. You will never be happy. You will be sad. You will go through shock and anger at yourself of why you fell. But in the process, you will learn something and you will adapt and you will evolve as a leader. And if you deprive yourself of those experiences, your career will get stuck. You will not be able to grow and evolve as a professional.
Awesome.
I think I think that's wonderful. And I think this idea of failure is also kind of ascribed to us in a way that is much more of a framework than is real. I think that we do our best learning from this so-called failure. And I think that the sadness is not to try something, not to sort of move forward and then learn from the things that maybe didn't work so well. And I remember getting advice from someone here at Stockton, and Arlene, you probably know Daisy Rios, who was here a long time ago. Yeah, the one question that's the fundamental question to ask is like, what is the worst that can happen? I mean, and also being able, I have found in my career around this issue of failure, is to be able to be transparent and admit when something doesn't work right, but then put the effort to understand and sort of take it to the next step and realign or regroup. If we didn't have failure, we wouldn't have all the small businesses that we have that are so dynamic, that have become, successful. So in essence, I would correlate it to success, failure.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we will move on. Our last question, and then the Q&A can begin. But the last question is to Billy. Women struggle with self-promotion and with the expectation that they must be likable. Because of this likability factor, some women are not comfortable leading or being their own cheerleader. What advice would you give women on how to be your biggest cheerleader? In addition, please share with us how you claim and exert your power in uncomfortable situations.
So there's a saying, and you probably all heard it, toot your own horn. I add to that and say, if you don't toot it, it may never get blown. So it's easy for me to toot my own horn through my students. At my institution at Kane, we have two news articles, two newspapers. One's called the Cougars Bite, and all the students read the Cougars Bite. And then the other one's called the Tower. And the administrators, the faculty and staff, everyone reads that Tower. So I always put myself in a situation where I have students who are tuning my horn. They write articles, they publish them in the paper, and the next thing I know, 2 months from now, someone's calling me and say, oh, wow, I didn't know you were doing that. Oh, wow, I didn't know Passport or EOF was doing this. Oh, wow, you're doing such awesome things. And I'm like, oh, gee, thanks. I didn't know anyone noticed. But that's the way to toot your own horn, and you don't have to be cocky about it. Right. You don't have to be cocky about it. So I always make sure that there are students who are taking courses in journalism and writing or whatever it is. I'm encouraging them. And then I say, listen, you know what, don't forget, come to a workshop, come to one of the symposiums that I'm facilitating. And then they write about it, and this is how I get that tooted horn out there. So I don't really necessarily have to go and pat myself on the back all the time, oh yeah, you did a great job. The students are doing it, and I feel great about it because I'm helping the students.
Yeah, I could add that as faculty, we kind of have to do that all the time, especially when you're trying to get tenure. So, as I was told when I was trying to get tenure, save every piece of everything you do, save the paper, save the document, put it in your file so that you can write about how awesome you are for you playing this program, and you did that, and you put on this panel. So, we kind of have to get comfortable with that. And so I remember, being given that advice when I first started here, and I was on what I call the tenure treadmill, which very much feels like a treadmill. And so that's one part of it. And then the other part of it, in terms of when I was talked into running for faculty senate president, that I reluctantly did, but it was only after the 2016 election that I felt like, okay, now I have to. But I remember kind of saying, well, I don't know that enough people would vote for me or like me or whatever. I don't remember what the context of the conversation, but I do remember the person saying, I don't think it's about people liking you. I think it's about people respecting you. And so that resonated with me quite a bit, because I definitely have always worked from a place of integrity. Because another reason why I was resistant about faculty senate president is because I just don't consider myself a very political person. I don't make political moves. I just try to be honest in my approach and what I'm doing. And so I was concerned that that wouldn't bode well, because you kind of have to be political. But again, the same person that I was in conversation with said, no, just be yourself. You don't have to be like the past president, who was a very, made a lot of political moves. And I was like, I don't do that, and I'm not comfortable with that. But the advice was, you don't have to be like that person. You do the presidency your way, and function from your own place of honesty and who you are. And that's what's going to work for you. And again, as long as, people see that and respect that, they're not always going to agree with your decisions, and that's fine too. But it's still more important to be respected. And so that's kind of how I operated.
We have time for a couple more comments on this one, if anybody wants. If not, we'll move on to the Q&A.
I was actually going to share that I come from a very Christian Baptist background, and in our upbringing, we learned very early on to not be real braggadocious, to be very humble. We even used to sing this song, "Let the works I've done speak for me," and so that you didn't really have to kind of brag about all the things that you've done. But I do believe, for those of you who are religious in here, that the Lord does provide platforms for you to be able to toot your own horn, as Billy said. And I think that we ought to take advantage of those platforms. The second thing is, because as women, we wear so many hats, and we're a lot of times very overwhelmed, because we're always serving and always doing things, a lot of times for other people and not necessarily for ourselves. I would suggest that we start putting ourselves on our own agendas. And I don't think that we do that enough. We don't make the time to look up compensation history for the jobs that we hold in the area, for example. How do we know that we're not underpaid? How do we know that there's not another job opportunity out there for us? How do we know that, there's not something that we're missing out on because we're not researching it and doing it for ourselves, or we're not putting ourselves on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, wherever it is that we need to put ourselves on because we don't have time, or we feel like we don't want to brag. So I think that it's necessary to take the time out to put ourselves on our own agenda, so that we're making it time for ourselves and we're being intentional about doing that.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll begin the question and answer. I believe Juby's got a microphone, and she's going to she's going to go to whoever wants to ask a question is what she's going to do. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and Juby will come find you.
Hi, my name is Thelma Witherspoon, and I'm a leader in my community. My question is to the women: how do you say no? When people know that you have leadership skills, sometimes you get pulled in so many different directions. That's question number one. And question number two, how do you continue growing once you have reached a certain level that you feel comfortable with?
Yeah. Go ahead.
ahead.
You say it like this, no.
Let's practice that.
I'm going to kind of deal with both of those because I feel like in a way they're interconnected. Because for me, I've served on every possible committee that this institution has. And so now I'm at a space where it's more about what I'm passionate about and what I want to do. So I think you have to, in terms of continuing to grow, you have to think about it in those terms. Like what are those things that I really want to do and really want to be involved in, and why? So you kind of have to ask yourself those questions. So there are times where, and there have been times where some of, my senior faculty mentors have come to me and, why are you doing it? You're doing too much. Why are you doing? But there's always a reason for, what I'm doing. I don't just say yes to everything, but I'm often in that position where, and like somebody mentioned earlier, that notion of seat at the table. I often feel like there are times when I've said yes to something for the simple fact that I felt like, somebody's got to be in this room, and if in this situation it has to be me, then fine, it has to be me. But I really do think about things in terms of, why should I do that? Or is that something that I really want to do and really feel strongly about? That's what helps me to continue to grow, and that's what helps me to kind of decide more on what I want to say yes to and what I want to say no to. And I think it's the experience of all of us that as a woman of color, you're asked to be everywhere, because it looks good. We're going to take pictures here and we want you to be here kind of thing. So that's clear. Like, I'm clear on the situations where, okay, this was a photo op, or this was whatever it was. But think about it in terms of, okay, so do I want to do that today? Or do I want to just kind of focus on something that I really am passionate about? So that's where I weigh those options of the many rooms I'm asked to be in.
I agree with her. It's okay to say no. When you have so much on your table and on your plate, it's okay to say no. I've learned that the hard way, because you don't want to burn yourself out. When people ask you to sit on this committee and ask you to sit on that committee, and they know you have skill sets that are, or whatever it is that they're looking for, but it's okay to say no. Just recently, I had to turn someone away, and it's hurtful because they really thought I was really going to say yes, because I normally would say yes, but I have so much on my plate. And I didn't see growth or potential to learn anything from the experience. So sometimes you just got to say no.
I'd like to offer just this perspective. One thing that I've learned in my leadership role, especially in working with students, is I try not to say no without giving a recourse. So I want to always be able to give people who come to me options. And I think we should use that as an opportunity to identify other people of color, women of color, who might not be seen as much on campus or who might not have the same opportunities that we have, to say, look, I can't do that, but you know what? I know someone who might be available to you. Why don't you look at Arlene?
Perfect.
Why don't you ask her if she might be available? So I always try to give another option or recourse if I cannot be available. But I make sure that I weigh what I can and cannot do. I mean, you're no good to anyone if you're doing everything and you're doing it kind of halfway anyway. And I find that when we're overwhelmed, we run into our corners, and who takes care of the caretaker, the people who are always doing and doing and doing, who's depositing into you. So you have to, just use your discernment in that way and be able to say, no, I can't do this, but here's another option for you.
I just wanted to add that these two questions are really personal to me. And I see this question of saying no in a sort of multiple dimensions. One is, many of us are parents. When you become the mother of a child, you really get clearly how important it is to have structure and to say no and be grounded in that, right? And oftentimes in our work worlds and in other places, our civic worlds, we tend to be afraid of saying no because we're afraid of how we're seen. And it comes back to that having a center of yourself, like really knowing kind of where you stand. And when you have baseline information as to why you say no, it becomes so much easier. And the other thing I would say about that is, and I've like really worked through this in my own life and in sort of my own thinking, is saying no and simply letting it be at that. Sometimes we say no and we think we have to explain it. Maybe it's just simply no. And for reasons that are very grounded, obviously, having good information. The other around growing, I mean, I think as human beings, and we're multidimensional, I see my life today as like constantly growing until I die, right? So part of this idea of growing, I think, is centered in the ability to have curiosity. Because I think when we're curious, we're more engaged and we ask questions, but also sort of, you know, in the professional sense, always looking to sort of look at what's out there, look up and read more and learn more, either from where we work or personally. And I think having a balance of those two is really important to our lives, particularly as women.
I would just add, I think the question of saying no brings us back to that idea of likability. And so sometimes we are afraid to say no because, oh, how are we going to be judged? And as women, we often are raised with this sense that we need to be nice. And when you say no, then you're not being nice. and that affects our likability. And so it's tough because, as you said, most of us, because there are so very few of us, find ourselves being tapped to be the person who represents your group in every area that needs representation. And so it's hard to say no because you think, oh my gosh, well, if I don't do it, what's going to happen?
It's going to fall apart.
Who's going to fill that position? But I agree. I mean, at the same time, when you spread yourself so thin, then you really aren't making the contribution. Then you really are just being the token. So and I think that goes along with the idea of how do you grow. And I agree with passion. And I think of it not so much as what are my goals, because that's very specific, but what is my vision? What is it that I want to do with the education I have, with the opportunities that I have? And for me, that answer has been, I want to be able to contribute and promote the Latino community and give opportunities and be supportive to the Latino community. And so when I first started my career, one of the things that we did was to create that Latin American and Caribbean Studies minor. That did not exist. And so that was done. I taught the course in Puerto Rican history and culture. Never taught before, and I'm not an historian, but I said, oh, this is something that needs to be here. As I've moved through my career, now actually just today I was talking to our community engagement person about bringing a course into Atlantic City to our new campus that would bring the community onto the campus in the vein of some sort of community justice institute. So the goals really follow the vision that you have. And I guess that's just another term for your passion. What is your passion? And the goals then come from that. So.
I will add one last thing regarding the question about growth. I think you need to keep yourself humble. Mm-hmm. As you grow professionally, it's going to be very tempted for your ego to get out of control. Mm-hmm. And if you don't keep yourself humble and grounded, you're going to miss the opportunity of learning. And you can learn from everyone around you, from everyone in every position that's around you. And I think it's important as you reach and climb that ladder of leadership that you keep yourself humble and open to other people's ideas, and you learn to talk less as the years go by and to listen more so you can keep learning of what is going on around you.
Hello. I have one question for the panel, and I'll preface it with a commentary. Brother W.E.B. Du Bois put forth the argument of the talented 10th and how he saw the talented 10th contributing towards the economic emancipation of the black community. And his counterpart would have been Booker T. Washington, and he advocated that vocational training was the pathway towards economic emancipation for the community. In the same regard, today, thank you again to the panelists. Each of you is very well educated. So by the rationalization of Du Bois, you would be amongst the talented 10th from the respective communities. What words or comments do you have for, let's say, the young men in the audience? Women, the data shows, continue to outperform. The numbers are in academia, 60% women at the undergraduate base, 40% men. At the graduate base, 70-something% women, and 20-something% men, just for this geographic region. What words of encouragement might you have to the men of color that might be in the audience, of students and the like? Any suggestions, any recommendations on things that they could do? Because ultimately, there's coming a point where not enough of the men, at least from the communities of color, will be at the table as well. So any commentary will be welcome. Thank you.
I think, well, unfortunately, there aren't many in the room. There are not many in the room, I should say. That's unfortunate. But I think respect is the first word that came to mind with your question. And I just, 2 days ago, I think it was, or 2 or 3 days ago, had to pull aside a couple of the men of color in my classroom because their behavior was very disrespectful. And I pulled them aside and I said, listen, don't come to class if you're going to behave in that way. I said, it is disrespectful. And just in thinking about the dynamics of the class, you have to think about that. You have a woman of color teaching your class, and you are going to have these continual side conversations. I mean, it was ridiculous. And so if they take nothing else away from the semester, I hope they remember that encounter, because they need to understand the importance of respect. I'd rather you not be here than to be here and behave in that way, because you really have to think about that and how that looks and what that says to other students in the class. That I don't even have any respect for this woman who, looks probably like my mom. And that bugged me. And so again, I felt that it was very important for me to have them wait at the end of class and have that conversation. They both apologized and all of that, but I thought that it was important to me to bring that to their attention. So that level of, respect for just other, women in general, but women of color around them is very important. And if that's not a lesson they ever learned before, then they, needed to learn it that day. So that, that's just the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question.
Pedro, I'd like to address the actual question because I think your question, and if you would just allow me, and I say this respectfully, needs to be changed. I think that I wouldn't address the men of color at all, or the students of color at all in the room. I would address the executive administrators, I would address the faculty, and I would ask what support systems are here that speak to learning communities for men of color to succeed on your campus, and also to learn those types of behaviors that Donnie has already referenced in a way that they feel valued, that they feel loved, that they feel embraced, so that they can then go out into their communities and embrace their women of color. And so I would kind of rephrase the question. We are doing an injustice, and I say this as a Black woman who has been at a university, who was raised in Jersey City, who worked at NJCU for 20 years, so I've been in the urban community and I know these things. We are doing an injustice and a disservice to men of color on our college campuses. And it's not their issue, it's our issue. We don't have the support systems that speak to the social factors that affect them. And so this is stuff that W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. all of them have been talking about for years, and we still haven't got it right. And at NJCU, do you know that we had 411 Black men? About maybe 10 years ago, we had an initiative called What's the 411, because we only had 411 Black men, and maybe not even 1% of them were graduating. And so I wouldn't tell anything to the men of color in the room. What I would do is speak to those who are in leadership, who have the power and the authority to affect change for those students. That's what I would do.
I just wanted to add just a very small point relative to the question. I mean, we're up here speaking as women of color from our experiences. And as a mom of a soon-to-be 20-year-old Latino boy from Puerto Rico, who faces many of the issues, and I know will be facing in his career and in his sort of walk through life, the very kinds of issues that I think we've described for ourselves in our experience. I think many things have not changed. So young men of color may also have that experience of walking into a boardroom, if they're lucky to be in that boardroom and being the only person of color, male on top of that, but in an environment where traditionally it has been male-oriented. So whether you splice it by race or color, right. I think that the issues still resonate. Right. And I think, you know, I today more so than ever in my life, really try to center around self. I teach yoga, and sort of my center around really understanding myself and really centered from there and starting out is one piece of advice I would give young men of color. Kind of be grounded, learn, be curious, step out into the world with a sense that, you know, you are needed and you are valued, and that your voice at the table is equally important and valuable because of your experience, because of the color you come from, color of your skin, but mainly because of the cultural experience, the families, the environments, the neighborhoods. So, you know, in this sort of sense around diversity, and I remember talking a lot about this issue of diversity when I was at DOT running civil rights. You know, everybody's voice is important, and so having a sense of self in that process, I think, is a helpful thing to center on when we look out into the world.
I think we're running a little long, but we'll have one more question, and then we will have some quick closing remarks, but we'll get one more audience member a chance.
Hi, my name is Naima Chowdhury, and I just wanted to thank you all for sharing. When you were speaking, I was just like, yes, yes. I had to stop myself from doing that, but something that really touched me was loneliness and mentorship. I think for me, being a professional in higher education, being the Muslim Bangladeshi woman in committees, I used my voice, but there have been times where I felt lonely because when I'm explaining my experience, a lot of people would look at me like, I don't get it. And it's very difficult sometimes because I'm trying to share my voice, but at the same time trying to empower myself at the same time, and it's been difficult, and I've been trying to get a mentor, and I've realized I'm suffering from not having a mentor when you were all speaking, because I'm like, there are times where I just was stuck, and I'm like, I need to talk to somebody. But I didn't feel safe to talk to somebody who wasn't understanding my experience, who was dismissing my experience. And I guess my question to you all is, have you ever found yourself in a position where you didn't have a mentor and you weren't an undergrad and you needed to speak to someone, but you were just stuck, whether it's in your career? Because I feel like I'm stuck in my career right now because I don't have a mentor to ask and say, which direction should I go? Should I continue being here? Should I, even though there are some parts of my job I enjoy a lot, but there are parts of my job where I feel like my experience is getting dismissed. And I really want to hear from you all to see, was it easy to get a mentor, or how did you navigate situations where your experience was dismissed and you didn't have anyone to talk to?
I'll speak to that because I did speak about that word lonely, sort of the word that comes into my head when I think about my career. But at the same time, what I also spoke about was that although there were not other Latinos or other Puerto Ricans on the faculty, there were other people of color. There were other women of color. And if you've heard nothing else coming from this panel is that being a minority of any variety, we pretty much experience the same things. So even though I may not have been able to speak to another Puerto Rican woman, I could certainly speak to an African American woman who shared the same experience, because I'm not really sure that people really draw distinctions when they look at us. You know, we're just all minority women. And so we end up, as you heard, pretty much sharing the same experiences. So that would be my recommendation to you, that even if you don't find someone who is like you, there, in some aspects, other minority women are likely experiencing the same things that you are experiencing, and you can support one another.
I would also suggest too, it's taking initiative too, and taking every opportunity to, I meet, people at conferences in different places. It doesn't even have to be people at your institution. I have folks that I can call other places and say, you know what just happened to me? Like, this was crazy. But a part of that is kind of taking initiative to get to know people. I've met people and just asked for their card, and I would love to talk to you more about certain things. So sometimes it's not right there or visible in front of you, but you kind of have to find those opportunities to search for, somebody who might, and just like Arlene is saying, it might not be somebody who's in the exact same situation as you, but another woman of color will likely be, have had a similar experience, or be able to say, you know what, I had an experience like that, and this is what I did. So it's hard to always find somebody who's in your exact situation, but somebody who's similar will often be able to have those conversations with you. So I've just kind of built up networks of different people at different places. It's not even always people right here at Stockton, but sometimes it's just folks at other institutions who get it, who know where you're coming from. And I'm sure there are other folks, at other institutions who, or even here for that matter, who would get that feeling that you may have had at a meeting or something like that.
And I would add,
No, go ahead.
one of the things about being in a university setting, I think universities are really good at different levels of at least having open opportunities for staff to belong to associations. I think associations play that value to that same point, that, oftentimes we tend to think of, we have a thought, and then that thought becomes kind of what we feel, and then what we feel becomes how we act. So if I say to myself, I'm lonely and there's no one else around, I'm going to sort of take that in. My brain's going to tell my heart's going to say that's how I feel, and I'm going to act that way. So I've been more and more a student of how like my brain affects my heart, how it affects my actions. And what I would say, a really important question I always ask myself is that, where is that coming from and how can I change that? And it's pretty amazing when you sort of change the narrative in your own mind and in your own heart and brain and sort of therefore how you act, how all of a sudden you see better around you, so that those people who you might not have imagined would be the people or the person who comes in to help you sort out a question that you're trying to deal with or understand something better, sort of becomes more apparent. We sometimes have these lenses where we may not always see. That's not to diminish that we don't feel lonely. And I'm not saying that I've experienced that my entire career at different points and at so many tables. But I've changed the question, the narrative that I have to myself, and have been open to looking in different ways to get what I need.
Billy, you want to close it out?
Yeah, I can do that, thank you. I just wanted to say networking is important. Networking, building those resources. When you reach out to other people who have similar situations, they know people too. And then they know people too. So don't feel like your own small cocoon is all you have. Build up your network. Get to know other folk. Like she was mentioning at conferences and things, I am always talking. I'm the life of the party because I like to network. I like to get to know people, and I want them to know me. So when I'm out there and I need to know something, I can pick up the phone. I can make a phone call. I can call someone. And if they don't know, they know someone who does. So never feel like that loneliness that I'm on this island by myself. You don't have to be. Just make that phone call, get to know people, go to different organizations, different presidents, things like that. Just reach out to them, and they will help.
Thank you. And now to close this fantastic presentation, you were riveting. Time passed like nothing. I'm going to introduce Rosa Perez Maldonado, who organized this panel. Rosa.
Thank you so much for actually, I know out of your busy schedule, coming here to really listen to these fabulous women. I mean, I know I'm very moved and I can relate to a lot of what they've said, and I kind of want to continue the conversation. But first, I just want to give them a real strong applause because they were amazing. So with that said, I know Pedro, did the introductions, and he talked a little bit about the purpose of Unidos and also, the actual meaning behind this actual, platform where we're all talking about women and women of color and leadership. But I also want to conclude with thanking certain individuals. There was a lot that happened in the background to make this little event possible today. So I want to make sure I mention names. Heather, Jessica, also, Maddie in the back, who, because of her, all the logistics, food, every little element for tonight is, I definitely want to give kudos to Maddie, Brian in the Dean's office, who made sure he took care of my panelists and making sure they had maps and they had directions. Diane, I don't know where Diane is at, but Diane was fabulous in helping us organize and also providing us gifts for all of our panelists. Obviously, as Pedro has stated, the Unidos Executive Board, all of us took months in thinking and formulating, and especially the panelists. I think when I reached out to every single one of them, I thought, let's see what they're going to say. Will they be able to come? So I really want to thank them because they really made this possible. And of course, Office of Student Development, Residence Life, and Chartwell. At this point, I want to turn it over to do a meet and greet. So if you have more questions, you want to network, this is a good time. Please come over right outside of the theater. We have some food and beverage. So please join us.